Let's cross to Arizona now, where we can speak live to Dr. Laura Smith, Assistant Teaching Professor at Arizona State University. Good evening, Laura.
Good evening. Thank you so much for having me.
Great to have you. Thanks for your time tonight. So is this Kamala Harris's big moment tonight, do you think? Because it feels like we were expecting one speech, but we've ended up having a couple of other brief glimpses. But is this the big one tonight?
This is the big one indeed. I mean, the Democratic Party, as you played all of the clips there, there's so many different talents that they can have, and there have been a lot of surprises. Like the roll call yesterday, they didn't make it a boring roll call. The Republicans were very traditional in theirs. They made theirs fun. They had like celebrities popping up here and there to engage and excite voters. Kamala Harris has had some odd appearances here and there before the big, as a teaser, if you like, before her big speech. You obviously had the Clintons, you've had Nancy Pelosi, and of course, who could forget the Obamas. Really, the Republicans can't match that in terms of speaking talent. I think any country in the world would be pressed to find speaking talent like that.
So what about Kamala Harris's big message then? What's the key point she'll be expressing to the American people in this speech?
We've really seen this massive shift from a focus on the Biden campaign that was very much focused on a sort of rerun of this sort of, battle for democracy and this idea that democracy is under threat, to the shift in the Kamala Harris campaign very much focused on freedom. And you heard that in some of the clips you played there. This idea that the Democratic Party is trying to broaden its base and excite independent voters into its ranks by saying it's about your freedom. We're not telling you what to think. We are a big tent party, and we want to protect your freedoms in a way that Republicans are no longer willing to do.
Now, Laura, there's quite a lot of history, isn't there? You know, in '68, there were riots in the streets of Chicago when the Democrats held their national convention against the backdrop of the Vietnam War. The city mayor sent in troops. It was a big moment, wasn't it, quelling disturbances, and things turned pretty ugly. So there's a bit of a history, isn't there?
Oh, there's a massive history, and I think that Democrats really didn't want to be reminded of that, and they wanted to avoid that at all costs this year, especially with it being in Chicago, as you said. The mayor at the time was really responsible. He had a very strict policy of he was going to uphold law and order no matter what. And so the police really got in protesters' faces and escalated the violence in a way that would be absolutely unacceptable today, hopefully. And certainly with the advent of social media would be everywhere. People would be held accountable in a way that was impossible in 1968. So we do see some protesters in terms of protesters who are concerned about Palestine in particular and concerned about Gaza, but they are a minority, and certainly things have remained peaceful. Yeah,
we've heard that, haven't we? Repeated quite a lot, the sense of unity, excitement, momentum. Then we heard Oprah and some of the guys talking about positivity and that message. But do you think that's cutting through to the outside world?
The unity, I think that it's very interesting because Kamala Harris has, 75 days to introduce herself to the country or reintroduce herself. A lot of people are still talking about her failed run 4 years ago. And what we're seeing in Arizona is a lot being inundated by ads from the Harris campaign. They've clearly invested a lot of money into this. They're expanding their on-the-ground operations. A lot of the campaign from both the Harris and the Trump side is focused on law and order. Either her experience as a prosecutor or him talking about the border and trying to stoke fear. The only other ad that I've seen from the Trump campaign, and there have been fewer ads, was one on YouTube that was talking and comparing to Ronald Reagan, which, again, is trying to harken back to those old Republican roots that are really hard to compare with nowadays.
Now, Laura, I want to talk a little bit more about the Vice President and the level of wider voter recognition. So have a listen to the Democratic strategist. This is Hillary Rosen.
One of the interesting statistics that we've seen this week is that the Democratic Convention TV ratings have been much higher than the Republican TV ratings. A lot more people are tuning in. You've got to assume that that's because people already know who Donald Trump is. Undecided voters are really trying to figure out who Kamala Harris is, what the Democrats are standing for now that Joe Biden has stepped down. And that's the opportunity that Democrats have. What is this party for? What is Kamala Harris going to do leading it to the next several months? And therefore, we're going to get much bigger ratings. We're going to get more people tuning in. And that's her big opportunity tonight.
And with that in mind then, Laura, what would your response to that be? You know, what we're going to learn about Kamala Harris tonight?
I think that it's very interesting in the sense that the Democrats are very much hoping to turn this into a movement, that now they have a chance to have a change campaign. So I agree in that sense that this makes sense. A lot of people are tuning in more than the Republican convention, when obviously you had it just in the throes of the assassination attempt, but it wasn't really going to incite, more support for Trump. You wasn't going to sway voters or new voters to his side. People know him. So in terms of what we're going to hear tonight, I think we've heard a lot more about the personal side of Kamala Harris. You played that thing from The First Gentleman. You played that clip. So I think we're just going to hear more about how she's going to reach and try and unify the party and set them forth onto this big mission that they have, just 75 days. So it really is a race to finish.
So Donald Trump, right, he says that he's been in power for 3 years and 7 months already. Or sorry, she's been in power for 3 years and 7 months already, and she's not achieved anything. Is that a fair criticism?
I think it would be difficult to point to a vice president who was wildly successful or wildly well known. That this is not a role that a lot of people covet. It's true in the 20th century, if you wanted to be president, the most likely way of doing it was being vice president. But it's not particularly a role that you could put on your CV that is going to be very noteworthy. In fact, Lyndon Baines Johnson actually infamously compared it to a warm bucket of piss in his Texas mannerisms in terms of utility. And of course, he came from it being, really involved in the House. He was very powerful as a lawmaker and used that in his presidency for the Great Society, but he couldn't do much as vice president. So I think she has an opportunity here to reinvent herself and to reintroduce herself to the nation.
One thing that I feel has been quite conspicuous by its absence is a big sit-down interview. Is that something that's been done that I've missed just because we're over here, or is it something you think will be deployed at a nearer time?
It's not you.
Right.
No, she's getting a lot of heat and a lot of pressure for this from the media. And that's why Donald Trump is doing more of the press interviews to sort of make this contrast. However, Democrats are being very tactical about this because they don't want the media to be able to drive a narrative about her or take her words away from her. They want a very strict message right now, and they want that coming out of the convention. So I think she's going to be very sort of media controlled because there's just not a lot of time to have an October surprise. God forbid what that would be at this point, but or to have a slip up and then clean it up somehow.
Now, Laura, while we've got you on, I wondered what you thought about Donald Trump behind the bulletproof glass. Do you think the events of recent weeks have changed him at all?
I think the quote from I believe it's Maya Angelou, when someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time, I think maybe an apt expression.
It's a very short and I think you've made your point there, Laura. Look at more widely at the election race as well. We heard the Mayor of Phoenix say that her state was the closest of all last time around. So for our audiences here, how significant are these swing states?
Oh, they're extraordinarily significant. I mean, we saw Georgia, we saw Arizona go blue, and obviously Donald Trump was not happy about this and tried to change that any way he could. So everything could happen in the swing states, and everything is up for play simply because Democrats don't have that blue wall that they can rely on. 2016 proved that in a very painful way for Democrats. They can't rely on Pennsylvania or Wisconsin or Michigan or that area anymore. They have to broaden out. And they have an opportunity because these swing states like Arizona and Georgia are diversifying. You have a more broader base of voters that they could reach. So everything is up for play.
And before you go, I'd love if you could explain to me, there are 333 million people, but then that small number of voters we're talking about make this. How can that be?
How long is your show? No, look, I was teaching students today. It was the first day of the semester, and I said to them, we're doing this democratically, but today that means a popular vote. We're no electoral college in this classroom. So, yeah, it's all about the electoral college. It's all about this idea that it just goes by that and not the popular vote, even though a Republican hasn't won the popular vote for a while. So the Republicans have a problem here, but they're just not willing to face it quite yet, or Donald Trump isn't willing to face it quite yet. Well,
Laura, it's been a joy speaking to you. Thanks so much for coming on. We'll have to get you back on sometime soon. Thanks for your time.
My pleasure.
There we go. Dr. Laura Smith, Assistant Teaching Professor at Arizona State University.